Discrete math. So I actually realized that this book was the second edition, and there's actually a fifth edition out now, and I actually just ordered that fifth edition because the first chapter of the fifth edition has this chapter called the first chapter of the fifth edition has this is like speaking mathematically, and I think that probably gives a good overview of math. And I think it's probably an outsized return on investment for that chapter. So I thought buying the whole book was worth it just for that chapter. Plus, I mean, it's just got 20 years more of advancements and just like cleaning up text and better questions. So I'm sure it's better. So I'm going to spend a ton of time studying discrete math. Like I might as well use the latest edition from this book. But while I'm here and we're waiting for the book to get here, let's just jump into chapter 1, whatever. Let's do section 1, the logic of compound statements. So I'm just going to go about something and then I'll let you know what I did. All right, so there's this section right here. Aristotle, Kant quote. That's nice. Gotta love Kant and Aristotle. But yeah, there's this section right here that's kind of the intro to chapter 1, I believe. So let's read that and see what I get from it. It seems like it could be pretty dense, but let's get it. Yeah, that paragraph was absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And this is why I'm so annoyed with the school system, because we always skip those intro paragraphs and those like historical backgrounds and like applications, and we're just like, learn how to do this, learn the rules, instructions. It's like, that's useless then if you can't connect it. So Aristotle, it seems, is the father of logic, and he was the original person to write what the author called treatises, I believe, just like papers on logic. And logic, basically, for Aristotle, was using a way of using rules for using deductive reasoning that would be used for the study of all branches of knowledge. So that's just like so cool. Aristotle was trying to learn like everything, and I completely resonate with that. And I think that learning logic then is probably pretty cool and pretty great thing to do. So he writes these rules for deductive reasoning. Then I think in the 17th or 18th century, this German philosopher, I believe Leibniz, maybe I'm Leibniz. I've heard of him or seen his name. I just never have read anything by him or know much about him. But he was a philosopher, and he basically took deductive reasoning and logic and added symbols and used symbols to systemize and like mechanize logic, to streamline logic and like the study and application of logic, just like how symbols were used for algebra to streamline like numbers and their relationships and dynamic relationships. And then 200 years later, 100 or 200 years later, these two English mathematicians, George Boole and De Morgan. I forgot the first name of De Morgan, but De Morgan and Boole, Boolean logic, I'm sure comes from that. De Morgan's rule, De Morgan's law. These two mathematicians basically, I think they found Leibniz's work and then made the modern, they're fathers of the modern symbolic logic. So Leibniz would have been like non-modern, it would have just been symbolic logic, and now it's like modern symbolic logic. And modern symbolic logic then has provided the theoretical basis for a lot of computer science, including artificial intelligence. Can you believe it? That's so cool, because this book was written in the 90s, and they're talking about AI. No one even in the mainstream cared about AI until ChatGPT in like 22. So modern symbolic logic is the theoretical basis or part of the theoretical basis of AI. So probably want to learn that. Probably want to know what modern symbolic logic is all about. Pretty cool, I think. It's also like a bunch of other stuff I didn't really know. Automata theory and digital circuit logic design. Automata theory. It's hard to say what these other things are because I don't really know what they are, but pretty cool. And great intro chapter. Hats off to the intro chapter. And so now we'll have the intro to section 1, which is logical form and logical equivalence. Logical form and logical equivalence. So that's what this whole the whole chapter 1's about logic of compound statements, and then section 1's about logical equivalence and logical form. Logical form and logical equivalence. Yep. And I wrote down questions. What is logical form? What is logical equivalence? And I've also got what is deductive reasoning, because I kind of know what deductive reasoning is, but it's also hard. It's still abstract to me. It's like deductive reasoning is basically taking what I believe, like you take a fact or an axiom and then you derive truths from an axiom or an assumed truth. You take an assumed truth and then you draw other further truths, assuming this is true, that then these things are logically, these have to be true as well, just based on the rules of logic, like if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, like that type of stuff. Okay, we're going to learn a lot of logical rules. Logic is a science of the necessary laws of thought, without which no employment of the understanding and the reason takes place. Immanuel Kant. That's a pretty abstract, or maybe this is, I don't understand this. Logic is a science of the necessary laws. Okay, so logic is telling you the laws, like the rules. Logic is the rules of thought. Oh, so logic is how you think, the rules to proper thought, without which no employment of the understanding and the reason takes place. So if you can't use logic, so without logic, the rules of how to think of logical thought, the rules of like true thought, you can't understand, you can't apply understanding. Interesting. It's kind of like if you don't know how to use proper logic, then you can't apply and derive new truths and apply learned information, or know if learned information is true. That's not really the case necessarily. It's basically you can't derive more knowledge and apply that into unique, novel situations, kind of. It's more of a theoretical thing, I think, from Kant than a literal. More of a logic thing. More of a logical statement. Okay. With all that, let's jump into the intro to this section. Basically, I think he's saying without being able to without knowing logic and without using logic, you can't apply your understanding to new things and know if it's true or not. Or apply, Oh, okay. So if you're just told something and you're saying, this is a fact, here's an axiom, without logic, you can't, know anything, how to use that fact. Yeah, you can't know how to use that fact. It's just a fact then. You can't use it. Okay. Let's keep going. Section 1. Yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. This is pretty enjoyable. Wow. So there's a lot to take in. I only read one paragraph of that first section on logical equivalence and logical form, and basically what I got was first, the author says the central concept of deductive logic is basically argument form, and then she kind of goes on to describe what an argument is. A logical argument is basically a sequence of statements that is trying to show the truth of a conclusion. And that logic can't... So for an argument to be valid, right, the statements within the argument need to be true within their own merit, basically inherently true, or they need to follow from one of these truths, like logically follow from one of these inherently true statements. And if the statements are assumed true, and they inherently assume true statements are true, and the logic that follows is accurate or correct logic, then the conclusion can be deemed valid and correct. And so logic can't actually determine the inherent truth of a assumed truth or a statement. It can only show if an argument is valid and therefore the conclusion is true. Right? So you're only basically saying, is this argument accurate and true, and is the conclusion therefore true as well? That's all logic can do. It can't actually say like, what is this? Is this assumed axiom true? No, we're just assuming. Okay? So for that reason, logic is also known by other names, and the one that stuck out to me is the science of reasoning. Wouldn't it be great to understand and be able to apply the science of reasoning? Well, that's what I'm working on right now. And if you're watching this, you're also getting pretty close, or closer than 99.99999% of people. That's why I just love learning with really effective techniques, is because there you go. Right there, I just gained so much knowledge. One day, literally 15, 20 minutes of reading and talking, and I just gained so much knowledge. And I'll review some of it tomorrow, and I'm sure some of this stuff's going to stick for a long time, because that's like, I'm connecting it to like, yeah, Aristotle, ancient Greece, student of Plato, who was student of Socrates. These are like early fundamental Western philosophers. And back then, they didn't really have science. Like, they didn't have the scientific method like we have it now. They were way before the technology we have. They were a whole different world. And then you got this German philosopher, and then you got these mathematicians later. And symbolic logic, I've studied symbolic logic on my own, out of a geometry textbook. It's actually right there, geometry. It's actually got like 6 authors. Studied that on my own. So I'll be able to pick this stuff up quick. And then I studied again in college, in community college, my first math class I took, math for liberal arts majors, but it never clicked. It never clicked because this alone was the missing link. Stuff like this, where you just read about it, you get the historical background, you understand what the person was trying to do. They're not just trying to make up shit. Like, yeah, we're just trying to waste time. Sorry, we just try to make these symbols up for no reason. We're just trying to entertain ourselves. No, they're like, Aristotle's like, I'm trying to understand the universe, and we're going to understand it all. We're going to figure it out, and this is how we're going to do it. Like, these very influential people spent their life doing things they're extremely passionate about. And then we get to read them thousands of years later. Except when we read them, it's part of a mandatory curriculum, and the teacher's like, yeah, the kids will find this boring as hell. Nope, don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. All right, let me just ramble about how to do this shit, and then I'm going to give them practice problems. Epic fail, bro. Maybe the teachers don't even read this stuff. They're like, waste of time, waste of time, waste of time, waste of time, waste of time. All right, let's get to it. All right, plug and chug, boys. Memorize this shit or you're going to fail out. All right, that's it for today. That was very intellectually satisfying. I will say that. Extremely intellectually satisfying. All right, that's it for today. I'll talk to you guys later.